And what's important with these kinds of things is that it's not just reminiscing or remembering something happening a long time ago. That when you say something is a memorial or it is an anamnesis, it is, in a sense, taking that past event and making it present now. Bob Barron, Bishop Bob Barron now, is a guy that he and I know one another from days that we were both up in Chicago. And Bob likes to use when he talks about anamnesis, he talks about re-presenting, making something present anew through our remembrance. That it's not just a vague recollection, it's a re-presenting. And it becomes the foundation for us as Catholics talking about the real presence of the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. That the Eucharist isn't just reminiscing or remembering something that happened to some people a long time ago. We are sharing in this event so that it is as though we share in the Last Supper, though we share in the cross that is present now. Is a nice way to think about it.
Is there a particular psalm?
Yeah, there are about 5 major ones. Psalm 78, 105, 106, 135, and 136. And then there are 2 more that probably will bring to your attention. One is what we call wisdom psalms. Wisdom in ancient Israel. I know that this isn't a Hebrew or Greek class or a German class, but sometimes these foreign words end up being pretty important. In Hebrew, let's see. The word for wisdom is chokmah, and it looks like Hokmah. In if you transliterate it, chokmah, and it's another word like anamnesis. You know, when we think about wisdom, we think about good advice or clever sayings or principles for living. And some of that comes into the idea of wisdom. But when Hebrews thought of wisdom, they primarily thought in terms of skill. So that you could be, at the low end of the grading curve as a student. You could be a D- student and still have wisdom. Wisdom comes not with education and not with sophistication. Wisdom is played out in the living of life.
We call that common sense?
Yeah, something like that. That's not a bad way of putting it. But wisdom also has a religious component. The wisdom writings of the scriptures, usually in the Hebrew Bible, we think primarily of the book of Proverbs, the book of Ecclesiastes. The Song of Solomon gets thrown into, or the Canticles sometimes gets thrown into wisdom literature, but it's more like erotic love poetry. But the Wisdom of Solomon, Tobit, there are a few other books that aren't Hebrew books but Greek books. This wisdom literature that exists in the Bible, the Proverbs sort of make clear that there is a connection between piety, religious fidelity, and wisdom. And the slogan is that the fear of the Lord, the fear of Yahweh is the beginning of wisdom, but fools do something else. And fools are bent on self-destruction, but they're first self-destructive because their lives are not given wholly to the Lord. And so as a friend of mine used to like to speak about it, and he still probably does in sermons, sin makes you stupid. and there is something to that, that piety brings wisdom and sin makes you stupid. And so Chokmah is about a skillful way of life in a world that is created by God. And if you can achieve that, well, then you've achieved wisdom. Well, a lot of the Psalms pick up some of the same themes that we find like in Proverbs. This is Psalm 1. The very, very first psalm is lovely, but it is a wisdom psalm. Blessed is the one, or blessed are those who walk not in the way of the wicked, nor stand in the way of sinners, or sit in the company of the scornful or of the mockers. But their delight is in the law of Yahweh, or in Torah, in the law of the Lord, and on the Torah do the wise meditate day and night, and they will be like trees planted by refreshing streams of water. Their leaf won't fade and they won't die. And it says at the very end that the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will be destroyed. And it's basically this either or, the two ways in life: a way of wisdom that's centered on delight in the Lord and on the Lord's law, and on the way of sinners and mockers and scornful who wander amok without any kind of direction from God. And one leads to life, the other one leads to sure destruction. That's a wisdom psalm. Another couple examples. The very longest psalm is this 1,000,000-verse long acrostic psalm that we'll talk about a little bit next time. But it is the monster that no one wants to pray this come Liturgy of the Hours because it's so long. So what we've done is we've broken up the psalm, and it usually gets prayed at noon prayer every day in little chunks that are manageable. And but it's a very long wisdom psalm that is devoted to Torah, to the law.
And what's the number of that one?
That's 119.
119.
Yep. A few others. Psalm 45. That is a wedding psalm. It is about. It seems that you can augur from the circumstances and the events that it reflects on. It sounds like that this would have been probably composed to accompany a royal wedding. And so it's advice to the groom, advice to the bride, but it takes the form of wisdom. There is also I like the existential psalms. I don't know why I gravitate more toward laments and despair psalms. I mean, I don't exactly think of myself as Kafka, but the happy clappy psalms, I love them, but the texture of the laments and the sorrowful songs. Well, Psalm 73 is my favorite moment for moments of existential crisis. And it's all about, like I'm looking at the rich people and they're getting better and better and better. And I'm poor and I watch how the poor get abused and destroyed. And I thought, well, if this is how the world works, then screw it. and he says, I thought all of this stuff and I was ready to abandon Yahweh and give up my confession of faith. But then I was brought into the temple. And then suddenly it all became clear that the righteous, those who are truly devoted to Yahweh, will one day find their way to life. And it's the rich and the ones who don't acknowledge the Lord and the ones who live their life carelessly because they're self-sufficient. Those are the ones that are really in danger, and it's the experience. And so I imagine, that probably what happened was whoever composed the psalm had this moment of crisis. Who hasn't lived through the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and that's the day in the life, right? And it seems that would have been the circumstance that this person had. And then he comes into the temple of the Lord, and suddenly, in the presence of God, all of a sudden you're shaken from that unreal out there, and now you see what's real and what's important and recentered. and so every once in a while, when I pray that psalm, I think of coming before the tabernacle at church and suddenly being reminded of everything that's true about the gospel and going, that fixes everything. It doesn't fix everything circumstantially, but it fixes everything in terms of how I view my circumstances. I love Psalm 73 for that reason.
So would that be a song of lament or a song of...
That is actually a wisdom song. It sort of is a, you can look at it and say, well, it sounds like a little lament, but it's actually an after action report on a lament. It's like, I remember lamenting like this, but then I got brought into the presence of the Lord, and then I found true wisdom, is sort of the way it comes off. So, yeah, and one of the things you have to be really careful about, and I should probably warn you about this, nobody handed down a dictionary of genres from heaven and said all the Psalms work just like this. These are really general categories, and there are times when one psalm in different pieces will fit into one box a little better. And so what these end up needing to be is not hard, fast genres, but general and kind of opaque buckets that you can put these in. They tend to conform to a certain shape, but not all of them have every element. This makes the collection manageable, but it doesn't dictate the collection. That helps. This feels like almost like a lament at the beginning, but then it comes through, and at the end, you really do see that the point of the composition is that it's a wisdom song. Yeah. The last one takes up a lot of psalms. Primarily, and let me give you one last one. We've got just a couple minutes left, and let me read Psalm 2. Or somebody, I'll tell you what, so it's not me reading it. Somebody pull up Psalm 2.
Do you want all the verses read?
Yeah, go ahead and read the whole thing. This is an example of what we'll call a royal psalm or a song of kingship. Some of the psalms of kingship or the royal psalms have a person that they have in mind, and for this reason we call them messianic psalms or royal psalms. Or Davidic psalms, that they seem to be. They're not. You don't get their identity from the title, but you really get their identity from the context. They seem to have been spoken by somebody that was a king, or their reflection on the monarchy of ancient Israel. And so they're really great, and the New Testament always picks these are the ones that show up in the Gospels and in Paul as messianic psalms, that they're particularly applicable to King Jesus. At other times, some of the royal psalms, it's clear that they don't have a king in mind, but they have a theocracy in mind, that God is king. And so they exist in those two different types. One where they're theocratic, and another where they're Davidic or messianic in nature. And this has created lots of conversation among psalm scholars. Are these two things ideologically in conflict? If God is king, then how can a human being be king? Are they rivals to one another? And of course, this is where our Christian faith really helps, because all of a sudden you see that the Davidic monarchy, the kingdom of Israel, its monarchy, was intended to be an expression of God's kingship. And indeed, in Jesus, those two elements come together perfectly. That Son of God is not simply a royal title that you can give to just any king, although the ancient Israelites sometimes spoke of their kings as sons of God. But in Jesus, Son of God, who is God, is made perfect. And so these songs are ultimately fulfilled in Jesus, but they reflect that kingdom monarchical, the king and the nation